All right, good afternoon. This morning, I have I facilitate a group, several groups a week, 4 or 5 groups every week, which we call spirituality groups. And the hospital where I serve as a chaplain, and there's a challenge because here I am, a Jewish rabbi. And people think that it's a Jewish specific group, and it's not. We have Jewish services which are separate, and then we have the spirituality group in which we discuss spirituality, which is both religion and also non-religious spirituality. Recently we have been discussing in this particular group, in a particular building that we have every week. Last week I wasn't there, but other weeks, we've been discussing various religions, and one very thoughtful individual and deep-thinking individual in the group asked the following question. He said, do religions stay the same throughout history, or do they change? And the answer is yes, both. There are certain kernels that remain the same, and certain things that change. And when we engage in the study of comparative religion, we can see the various approaches that exist. So, for example, I spoke of 2 religions, one a very ancient religion and one a rather modern religion, that have gone through changes that typically happen within religious movements and religious communities, and I think we can see similar parallels within our own communities of how these various cycles take place in religious life. And these are 2 religions that are Eastern religions, and I was discussing basic things of the history of these religions and how they've essentially, in my estimation, gone away from certain things that are essential to how they were founded, and then taken the course of standard religion. And clearly, both of these religions have changed over the years. Clearly. So, the first religion I discussed was the Buddhist religion. And so I gave a little bit of background in the history of Buddhism and the legends that go around the life of Siddhartha Gautama, who was called the Buddha by his followers, and how these things developed. And it's really not time now to discuss. It's interesting how I've seen Jewish stories that tell the same, Jewish books that tell the same story of the life of Buddha, of a prince who was sheltered from suffering and pain in the world, and then exposed, and how it affected his psyche and his outlook in the world. Essentially, that's basically the story. That's not really what I wanted to discuss today. But essentially, Buddhism was founded as a philosophy as opposed to a religion. Although very few people, set themselves up to say, you know what, I'm going to found a new religion. I mean, it happens in modern times, and very few of the ancient religions were founded in that manner. They just happened, more or less, Usually, there wasn't the idea to found a new religion, but rather to instate some reforms in the existing religion, something like that, or to go back to what's believed to be the original, an ideal of restoration. Most new religious movements tend to invent ancient roots. Someone else came into the group a little later and was discussing a particular new religious movement, and we were discussing whether or not it's a cult. And I didn't want to be politically incorrect and call it that, although it certainly exhibits certain cult aspects. This particular new religious movement, but like many of these, it claims very ancient roots, but doesn't really bear it out. I won't mention which one it is. It's probably not the one you're thinking of anyway. But Buddhism essentially began not really as a religion, and kind of opposing the standard ideas of religion, and developing as more of a philosophy. And also, a major aspect of Buddhism is that it has no theology. Meaning, a person could be an atheist, a polytheist, or a monotheist, and still be a Buddhist, which is totally different from how other religions operate, meaning certainly the Western religions. Meaning, if you look at Judaism or Islam, you cannot reconcile either of those faiths with anything other than monotheism. Meaning, Judaism as a religion, and Islam, which is of course purely religious. Judaism itself, of course, is religious. It's not Judaism that's irreligious, but often people who are Jews you cannot reconcile these religions with anything other than monotheism. Christianity also, even though it's Trinitarian, is essentially monotheistic. You would assume Hinduism at the outset is essentially polytheistic. However, the more ancient Hindu texts point to a certain type of monotheism that exists within it. It's written by really not time now to discuss those aspects of Hindu theology, and also there are many different approaches and interpretations of Hinduism. Buddhism, all these questions are not questions. However, over the years, how it developed, it's very clear that at least certain aspects of the Buddhist community have taken on more of the trappings of a standard religion and just developed into just a regular religion. That's basically, more than that, it's not really time to discuss. I think the same phenomenon we can see in the Sikh religion. I had an interesting experience. I went to a gas station and I saw someone I went to school with, and I knew he was from India. And I asked him, he was discussing with me how he wanted to start a temple for his religion locally, and he was asking, how to get involved with the legal aspects of that and so forth. And we were discussing that. I have to talk to a lawyer and so forth about, incorporating and things. So, and I asked him, which religion are you? He said he's Sikh, and then he said I'm Sikh, but I'm not religious. And I didn't say it to him because it's none of my business, but what I really felt like saying to him is like, you're probably calling yourself quote unquote not religious as a Sikh are probably more in line with what the Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh religion, had in mind than how most religious Sikhs live their lives. Because if you study the origins of the Sikh religion, first of all, it's interesting how Houston Smith wrote a book on the world religions, and he doesn't, Sikhism is like a footnote at the end of, I think, his chapter on Hinduism. And he doesn't really describe it necessarily as a religion, as much as he describes it as an interfaith society of Sufi Muslims and Hindus that eventually it certainly developed into its own independent religion that's totally unique and separate from either of those communities, even though it has certain aspects of what those communities believe. So people have said it's a Sufi Muslim theology combined with a Hindu Indian culture, but that's also not exactly accurate. But all that being said, the fascinating thing about Sikhism is that it was founded specifically to be a quote-unquote anti-religion, meaning the main thing that they would focus on would be basic ethics and morals, and many other religious practices are seen by Guru Nanak to be superstitious. A lot of folks have said that the ideas of Sikhism really fit into what some people call a liberal progressive society today. Not in the political sense that we often disparage, but it's neither here nor there. Now, for example, certain practices, particularly practices that are common in Islam, and most of which are Jewish practices originally, the Sikhs taught were superstitious and wrong. And people don't see the forest through the trees because of their religious devotions. They forget about basic life, and so that's why there was this frowning upon against things that the Guru Nanak saw to be superstitious. And so, for example, practices, again, which were originally Jewish practices and became very major pillars of Islam, were declared superstitious by the Guru Nanak, such as fasting, pilgrimages, and one particular example would be the dietary laws. And so a belief that an animal has to be slaughtered a certain way in order to be permitted to eat by the religion was something that the Sikh religion banned. Islam, you have halal meat that has to be slaughtered in a particular way in order to be considered halal. Similar to how in Judaism, for meat to be kosher, first of all, it has to be a particular type of animal, and second of all, it has to be slaughtered in a particular way and by a professional. And the Jewish rules are much stricter than the Islamic rules as far as ritual slaughter. But that's just how it is. And the Guru Nanak essentially banned eating halal meat or kosher meat, although most likely in Punjab there wasn't a large Jewish community. India is a very big country. Most of the Jews in India were in Cochin, a few other places, so they probably didn't encounter Jews very much. So that was a major breakaway from Islam. However, there are monotheists, just like the Muslims, so that's a breakaway from Hinduism. Excuse me. But what eventually evolved within the Sikh religion is that it evolved all of these. So instead of, for example, slaughtering by slitting the neck, then they'll say, no, you have to slaughter by stabbing a knife or so. I don't know exactly how it works. But the point is that they, instead of just saying you can eat whatever meat, they specifically made their own type of dietary rules, which is the exact opposite of what the Guru Nanak would have wanted. In my estimation, the later gurus added these various religious practices, the turban, and not cutting the hair, and carrying the sword, and all these things. Everybody winds up with their own approach. So that's why I would say, like I said from the beginning, this friend of mine who considers himself to be non-religious Sikh is probably more in line with the original Sikh approach than with how it's practiced today. Now, a little bit more about what we could say about that. There was a story I had read about a Sikh temple in Canada, where there was an argument among the parishioners there as to whether or not they could sit on chairs, especially older people, because the tradition in the Sikh temples is that everybody sits on the floor, and that originated in the old days when not everyone could afford a chair, and so since they wanted equality among everybody, that is a very strong egalitarian spirit in the Sikh religion. So in order to bring that about, the tradition became that everybody should sit on the floor. Now the thing is, nowadays people can afford chairs, and most likely, I would say, again, like if the Guru Nanak were around today, he wouldn't be making people sit on the floor. Probably wouldn't be making them keep a beard or wear a turban or anything else like that either. So the argument was two sides. One side said, old people, they can't sit on the floor, especially in Canada, it's very cold. Let them sit in chairs already. And then others said, no, but this has been our tradition. How can we change the tradition? And when I see things like this, it makes me reflect on my own religion. Now, I don't mean to say anything like this because indeed the Sikhs are very hardworking people. They're very, but they maintain their culture. It's interesting. I was listening to a recording about the Mawa Eruv controversy, which is really should be no controversy if you know the facts of the story. In discussing this controversy, someone pointing out there in Mawa, it was a Sikh community moved in, but they sent their kids to schools and they played on the sports teams and this and that. Now, first of all, and the Hasidim wouldn't do that. The Hasidim, or even non-Hasidim, or any Orthodox Jews, they have their own schools, they have their own, they're separate, and so forth. And so how do we deal with that? What's the situation? And so they, if and the thing is, if the Hasidim were like that, so then they'd be more welcome. But because they want to separate themselves, people in Mawa don't want to welcome them. And want to do whatever they can to prevent them from moving in. They had other things to mention as well, but that was like the main issues there. The question I have is how many of those Sikhs who send their kids to public school do the next generation keep their traditions? Meaning, like I told about my friends, and there are many people, who leave the Sikh community. I think Nikki Haley became a Christian, if I'm not mistaken. And of course I believe in freedom in America, but the thing is this essentially saying shed your religion, meaning in a generation or two you're not going to have the funny haircuts and the beards and the funny hats, and the question with the Sikh community, was it wise, if you want to maintain a particular approach in your life, to send your children to public schools, or should you have made your own schools to maintain your ideology and your faith and your traditions and your culture? These are questions people have to ask on their own. That's not really the point of what I was discussing here. The main question I was discussing here was how religions change, and we see in this story here, the religion certainly changed, but now it is what it is, meaning it's not for us to judge what it was and what it is now and pick which interpretation is proper, because in America we have freedom of religion that's very radical, and so and so too, Sikhism isn't only the Guru Nanak. The Sikhism is the later gurus as well, who did institute these religious practices. Just like the Mormon Church is not just Joseph Smith and not just Brigham Young, but how it developed over the years, that they, for example, got rid of polygamy or whatever it is. And by doing that, the religion changed. Now the question is, what about in Judaism? Now obviously Reform Judaism is a change, as Reconstructionism, all of these other movements or changes. Orthodoxy and conservative Judaism is a different question. Are these, and of course Orthodoxy will claim that we're the original Torah from Sinai Judaism, and we didn't change the way these others changed. And the question is that really so? Did we change? Did we not change? And it goes back to what I said from the beginning. There was change. I don't think anyone can deny that changes have taken place within Judaism. However, these were changes that were sanctioned in Torah for a purpose. Deuteronomy gives permission and authority to the judges to enact laws. And we see in Scripture various laws had been enacted throughout history. Things like Purim and the fasts. These are mentioned in the Bible. I mean, in Purim it says, it's enacted just in the same way that the just in the same way that the fasts were enacted, and we see in Zechariah mentioned the 4 fasts. So we see that the rabbinical law was something that existed in biblical times and has validity to it, and so too Hanukkah and so forth, and all these other things. These were but these were changes that took place, but they were changes that were sanctioned and authorized scripturally in Deuteronomy. And then the question is, what about other, subsequent, things that have changed over time? Most of those things tend to be cultural, but every now and then we start to identify them as religious. Maybe we should be aware of which things are religious and which things are not. Even if we don't change our practice, we should really be educated. But here, I don't, the difference, I think, and with all due respect to these other religions, is that the essential aspects of Judaism have, I believe, either remained the same or have been restored constantly back to the original form. They've been a restoration to the original ideals, meaning, yes, there have been times in history where the Jewish community were in a very poor situation. Think about the various kings of Israel and Judah and so forth, and all the issues that we could talk about in biblical times. But then there's always restoration, and so the same thing. There's a restoration of these Torah ideas, and then every now and then there's aberrations that go away from the Torah ideas, and it's it's our job to try to live up to Torah. I think that's somewhat different than when we compare how these two religions started essentially as being, like I say, anti-religions, not anti-religious, but anti-religions. And they developed into something that they maybe weren't originally supposed to. We can see a similar thing even within a religion, the religious movements within religion, like the Hasidic movement in Judaism, and even within different Hasidic communities, how there was initially, you could essentially say that a community like Satmar was founded as an anti-Hasidus, in a sense, meaning most of the trappings of Hasidism were downplayed in Satmar, and now they've become more central, and that's that could be problematic, but it is what it is, So for the most part, I think it really doesn't matter that much. I think the main thing is the essentials of religion. The one thing I think, one of the biggest mistakes I feel, there's one particular Hasidic group that I can think of that's obsessed with their Hasidic identity and place Hasidism almost above standard Judaism, and it's a problem. And the thing is, Satmar, it's just opposite. The main thing in Satmar always was and always is and always will be Torah, Shulchan Aruch, not some little minhag here and there, the way another group might have it. And but then people say, but look how they focus on the exteriors so much, and this and that, and this other group is so much more modern. And the thing is, still even to this day, I can see Satmar being much more open-minded and down to earth than this other group that maybe it presents itself as being more modern and more liberal, but really essentially is much more closed-minded and cultish. All right. Well, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. And a group like that, I think, certainly is a change from basic aspects of Judaism. However, everything they do, you can find a source for, and the real answer is that people are people, and religion is the question of how do people deal with God and relate to God, or other questions if it's not God. Like Buddhism is maybe not a theistic issue, but it deals with big questions, and it is what it is. It's how people deal, and so people are people, and people have their approaches. And that's how things change. Well, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment. And I look forward to talking more. All right. All the best.